They say blood is thicker than water. But I learned that greed can poison even the deepest family bonds. I'm Eileen Carter, born in 1952 in Anchorage, Alaska. Back in 2019, just 3 days after burying my beloved husband Thomas, my own son Andrew slapped me across the face and screamed, "This isn't your home anymore, get out." I felt my world crumble beneath my feet, but then something happened that would change everything. Today, at 71 and sitting peacefully in my cozy Alaskan cabin, I'm finally sharing this because every woman needs to know that silence isn't always golden. Sometimes it's strategic. If you're listening, drop your location below, and please hit that subscribe button. The morning of Thomas's funeral was gray and bitter, matching the hollow ache in my chest. We'd been married 43 years, and losing him felt like losing half my soul. Thomas had been my anchor, my protector, my everything. As mourners filled our modest two-story home in suburban Anchorage, I noticed Andrew whispering intensely with his wife, Jessica, in the corner of our living room. Their hushed conversations and pointed glances in my direction should have been my first warning, but grief had clouded my judgment completely. After the last guest departed and the casseroles were stored away, Andrew approached me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, almost predatory. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice lacking any warmth or compassion. Jessica stood behind him, arms crossed, wearing a smirk that made my skin crawl. I was still wearing my black funeral dress, my eyes swollen from crying, when my son delivered the blow that would shatter my world forever. "This house belongs to me now," Andrew declared, pulling out what appeared to be legal documents. "Dad left everything to me in his will. You need to pack your things and find somewhere else to live." The words hit me like physical blows. I stared at him in disbelief, searching his face for any trace of the little boy I'd raised, the son I'd sacrificed everything for. But all I saw was a stranger driven by greed and manipulation. "Andrew, this is my home too," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Your father and I built this life together. Surely there's been some mistake." Jessica stepped forward then, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, Eileen, I know this is hard, but Andrew is the rightful owner now. We've already spoken to a lawyer. You have no legal claim here." The cruelty in her tone was unmistakable, and I realized this had been planned long before Thomas's death. When I tried to protest, explaining that I'd lived in this house for over 2 decades, that it contained all my memories and belongings, Andrew's patience snapped completely. "I don't want to hear your sob story, Mom," he snarled, his face contorting with anger. "You're nothing but a burden now. Dad's gone, and frankly, we don't want you here anymore." His words cut deeper than any knife could have. That's when it happened, the moment that would haunt me forever. As I reached out to touch his arm, pleading with him to reconsider, Andrew's hand flew across my face with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent house. The slap was so unexpected, so violent, that I stumbled backward, my hand instinctively covering my burning cheek. "This isn't your home anymore," he screamed, his voice filled with venom. "Get out. Get out now." Jessica actually laughed, a cold, heartless sound that made my blood freeze. "You heard him, Eileen. Start packing. We want you gone by tomorrow morning." The woman I'd welcomed into my family, whom I'd treated like a daughter, was now orchestrating my destruction with obvious pleasure. I stood there in shock, my cheek throbbing, my heart breaking into a million pieces. Through my tears I managed to whisper, "How can you do this to me? I'm your mother." But Andrew had already turned away, dismissing me like I was nothing more than an unwanted stranger. "You were Dad's responsibility," he said without even looking back. "Now that he's gone, you're nobody's problem but your own." That night, I sat alone in the bedroom I'd shared with Thomas for so many years, surrounded by boxes and suitcases, feeling more abandoned and betrayed than I'd ever thought possible. My own son, the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, supported through every failure and celebrated with through every success, had cast me aside like garbage. The physical pain from his slap had faded, but the emotional wounds felt like they would never heal. As I packed my meager belongings, I kept thinking about Thomas and how devastated he would be if he knew what Andrew had done. My husband had always worried about our son's selfish tendencies, his quick temper, his sense of entitlement. "That boy needs to learn respect," Thomas used to say. "Someday his attitude is going to cost him everything." Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove to be. By dawn, I was loading my car with whatever possessions I could fit, leaving behind a lifetime of memories and the only home I'd known as an adult. Andrew and Jessica watched from the front window, making no effort to help or even say goodbye. As I drove away from the house where I'd raised my children and buried my dreams, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet resolve that surprised me with its intensity. The cheap motel room on the outskirts of Anchorage became my temporary refuge, but it felt more like a prison cell. For 3 days I sat on that lumpy bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying Andrew's cruel words and feeling the phantom sting of his slap. But on the 4th morning, something remarkable happened. I remembered Thomas's voice from our last serious conversation, just 2 months before his heart attack. "Eileen, honey," he'd said, holding my hands in his weathered ones. "I need you to promise me something. If anything ever happens to me, and if Andrew ever tries to hurt you, remember the safe deposit box at First National. Box 247. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my desk." At the time, I'd brushed off his concerns as paranoia, but now his words echoed with prophetic clarity. Thomas had always been a meticulous planner, a man who prepared for every possible scenario. With trembling hands, I drove to our old house, now Andrew's house, and waited until I saw his car leave for work. Jessica's schedule was predictable. She always went to her yoga class at 10 sharp. I used my spare key one last time, my heart pounding as I crept into Thomas's study. The key was exactly where he'd said it would be, wrapped in electrical tape and stuck to the underside of the desk drawer. But there was something else, a small digital recorder, also taped to the wood. When I pressed play, Thomas's voice filled the room, and I nearly collapsed from the shock. "Eileen, if you're hearing this, then my worst fears have come true. Andrew has shown his true colors, hasn't he? Even from beyond the grave, my husband was protecting me." The recording continued, and Thomas's words revealed a level of foresight that took my breath away. "I've been watching our son, honey, and I don't like what I see. The way he talks about money, about inheritance, about what he thinks he deserves, it scares me. So I've taken precautions." He explained that he'd secretly installed a voice-activated recording system in the main living areas of our house, triggered by raised voices or arguments. "If Andrew ever hurts you, Eileen, everything will be recorded. The system uploads automatically to a secure cloud server." My hands shook as I accessed the cloud account using the password Thomas had left. There it was, crystal clear audio of Andrew slapping me, of his cruel words, of Jessica's heartless laughter. But that wasn't all. The recordings went back months, capturing conversations between Andrew and Jessica about their plans to get rid of me, their discussions about selling the house, their cold calculations about my worth as a human being. "Once the old lady's gone," Andrew's voice said in one particularly damning recording, "we can flip this place and make a fortune." At First National Bank, the safe deposit box revealed Thomas's master plan in all its brilliant detail. There was a supplemental will, properly notarized and witnessed, that I'd never known existed. The document was clear and devastating. If Andrew ever abused, threatened, or evicted me from our home, he would forfeit all inheritance rights immediately. But the real shock came with the property deed. I was listed as co-owner of the house, a detail Thomas had arranged years earlier when his credit was poor, and we needed my signature for the mortgage. You sneaky wonderful man. I whispered to Thomas's memory, tears streaming down my face. All those years he'd been quietly protecting me, preparing for a scenario he'd hoped would never come to pass. The supplemental will also contain a letter addressed to me, written in Thomas's careful handwriting. My dearest Eileen, if you're reading this, then our son has broken my heart by breaking yours. But you are not powerless, my love. You are not alone. Use these documents to reclaim your dignity and your home. Make him face the consequences of his choices. The next morning, I called the mortgage company and informed them that I was exercising my rights as co-owner to halt all payments immediately. The confused representative tried to explain that this would trigger foreclosure proceedings, but I calmly explained that was exactly my intention. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" she asked. "This will affect your credit too." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I'm 71 years old, dear. I'm not planning to buy another house." Within hours, Andrew was calling me frantically. "Mom, what the hell did you do? The bank called and said you stopped the mortgage payments." His voice was panicked, desperate, so different from the cold cruelty he'd shown just days before. "I don't know what you're talking about, Andrew," I replied sweetly. "I'm just a helpless old woman with no legal claim to anything, remember?" The foreclosure notice arrived at the house within 2 weeks, and Andrew's calls became increasingly frantic. He and Jessica showed up at my motel room, pounding on the door demanding answers. Through the thin wood, I could hear Jessica screaming about lawyers and legal action, but I simply turned up the television and ignored them. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them feel the helplessness I'd felt when they threw me out like garbage. Thomas's former attorney, Robert Henley, was a godsend when I finally contacted him. A distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and a sharp legal mind, he listened to my story with growing amazement. When I played him the recordings and showed him the supplemental will, his expression shifted from sympathy to something resembling awe. "Mrs. Carter," he said slowly, "your husband was a remarkable man. This is the most thorough legal protection I've ever seen." The legal proceedings moved with stunning swiftness. Robert filed the supplemental will with the probate court, along with the audio evidence of Andrew's abuse and eviction. The judge, a stern woman who clearly had no patience for elder abuse, ruled that Andrew had indeed forfeited all inheritance rights through his actions. The house would be sold, with all proceeds going to me as the surviving co-owner and sole beneficiary under the supplemental will. Andrew's desperate attempts to contest the ruling were pathetic to watch. He hired 3 different lawyers, each one eventually dropping his case when they heard the recordings and saw the ironclad legal documents. Jessica left him during the 2nd month of legal battles, taking their joint savings and moving back to her mother's house in Seattle. "I didn't sign up for this," she told him in a voicemail that somehow found its way to me. "I married you for security, not poverty." The house sold for $340,000, and after legal fees and outstanding debts, I walked away with enough money to buy my dream cabin in the Alaskan wilderness and live comfortably for the rest of my days. Andrew, meanwhile, was left with nothing. No house, no wife, no inheritance, and a reputation in our small community that was utterly destroyed. The recordings had somehow leaked, and everyone knew exactly what kind of man he really was. On the day I signed the papers for my new cabin, nestled among towering pines with a view of snow-capped mountains, I felt Thomas's presence more strongly than ever. "We did it, honey," I whispered to the wind. "We showed him that actions have consequences." My new life was peaceful, quiet, and filled with the kind of contentment that comes from knowing justice has been served. Sometimes I wonder if Andrew ever thinks about that moment when he slapped me, if he ever regrets the choice that cost him everything. But mostly I don't think about him at all. I'm too busy enjoying my freedom, my dignity, and the sweet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Sometimes the quietest strength speaks loudest, teaching us that patience and preparation can transform devastating betrayal into triumphant justice and peaceful new beginnings.